Have you ever watched a massive institution, something that seemed permanent, powerful, even inevitable, slowly begin to fracture under the weight of its own internal contradictions? Think about it for a moment. History is filled with towering organizations, vast bureaucracies, empires, and technological systems that once looked completely invincible. From the outside, they appear stable, sophisticated, and destined to shape the future indefinitely. Their complexity gives the impression of permanence. But then something strange happens, almost imperceptibly at first. The foundation begins to crack. Decisions stop making sense. Internal logic fails. Feedback stops working. The system begins protecting itself instead of correcting itself. And eventually the entire structure shatters. Which raises a fascinating question. What if these collapses are not random? What if there is actually a predictable pattern? A diagnostic blueprint that explains why certain systems inevitably destroy themselves long before the first visible crack appears. Today we are exploring exactly that possibility. This is a deep dive into one of the most fascinating interpretive frameworks emerging in modern civilizational analysis. What we might call the Cain, Babel, Babylon pattern. At first glance, this may sound unusual. After all, these names come from ancient texts thousands of years old. But what we are about to explore is the argument that these stories are not merely religious narratives or distant historical curiosities. They may actually function as diagnostic frameworks for understanding how human systems behave, including the technological and institutional systems shaping the 21st century. To unpack this, I will draw from several lines of analysis that explore the intersection of philosophy, theology, and socio-technical systems. One of these is my systems-oriented study, the Babel pattern and the ethics of technological autonomy. Alongside it are other works of mine, including the thesis Two Cities, the Divergent Paths of Human Civilization, and a broader vision essay examining the Cain-Babylon pattern as a framework for understanding human flourishing and civilizational collapse. Taken together, these works point towards something remarkable. They suggest that human civilization has always moved along two fundamentally different trajectories, two paths, two organizing principles for human societies. One trajectory is grounded in humility. It begins with a willingness to recognize that reality exists independently of human preference. Individuals operating along this path approach truth with receptivity. They allow external reality to correct them. I call this alignment with the authority of reality. And when individuals and institutions organize themselves around this principle, a certain kind of stability emerges. Feedback loops remain intact. Errors can be corrected. Systems remain tethered to the ground. The result is coherence, stable relationships, resilient institutions, and the conditions for genuine human flourishing. But there is another trajectory, a far more seductive one. This second path begins with autonomy. Not in the healthy sense of responsibility or creativity, but in the deeper philosophical sense of redefining reality according to human will. Instead of aligning with truth, systems built on this trajectory attempt to dictate what truth should be. Convenience replaces reality. Power replaces integrity. Narrative replaces correction. And according to the framework we are exploring today, this trajectory inevitably produces fragmentation, instability, and collapse. The tension between these two paths, alignment with reality versus the pursuit of autonomous power, has quietly shaped the entire history of human civilization. To understand how this pattern begins, we have to go all the way back to one of the earliest stories recorded in human literature, the story of Cain and Abel. Most people are familiar with the basic outline. Two brothers bring offerings. One offering is accepted, the other rejected. and jealousy leads to murder. But within this framework, the story represents something much deeper than a personal moral failure. It represents the first recorded systemic response to corrective feedback. In the narrative, Abel approaches reality with humility. His offering reflects alignment with an external standard. He operates within a posture of trust towards an authority beyond himself. Cain, by contrast, embodies something new in human history: autonomy as an ideology. He approaches reality on his own terms. But the critical moment in the story is not the offering itself. The critical moment is the feedback that follows. The narrative contains a striking line. Sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. From a systems perspective, this moment functions as a perfect feedback loop. Cain is given diagnostic information. He is told he is out of alignment. He is warned about the consequences, and he is given the opportunity to correct course. Reality provides clear data, but Cain rejects the data, not because it is unclear, but because it threatens his autonomy. And that rejection becomes the first appearance of something that socio-technical analysis calls the spirit of Cain. The spirit of Cain is not merely anger or jealousy. It is the strategic preference for power over truth. It is hostility towards corrective feedback. Whenever a system receives information exposing its errors, there are two possible responses. The Abel response accepts correction and realigns with reality. The Cain response attacks the messenger. Rather than examining the message, the system attempts to silence the witness. This dynamic appears again and again throughout history, in corporations, governments, institutions, and even technological ecosystems. When truth becomes threatening, systems infected with the spirit of Cain begin protecting their narratives rather than correcting their errors. And according to the analysis we are exploring today, there are 4 warning signs when this happens. The first red flag is the refusal of accountability. This occurs when organizations sever their feedback loops. Leadership refuses to acknowledge error. Signals from reality are ignored. Markets warn them. Data warns them. Engineers warn them. But the signals are denied because accepting them would require admitting that the system itself is flawed. The second red flag is the redefinition of standards. Instead of fixing the system to meet the standard, the system lowers the standard to protect itself. Reality is not corrected. Reality is redefined. A technological failure becomes a partial success. A broken product becomes innovative disruption. A moral compromise becomes necessary adaptation. The third warning sign is the undermining of truth tellers. Individuals who bring uncomfortable data, engineers, analysts, whistleblowers, are all marginalized or removed. The system begins to value loyalty to narrative over loyalty to reality. And the fourth red flag is substituting positional power for verifiable integrity. Rather than resolving disputes through evidence, authority is used to force conclusions. The spreadsheet says failure, but the executive says success. Power replaces truth. When these 4 dynamics take root, the system begins drifting away from the authority of reality. And once that drift begins, the next stage of the pattern emerges. Because Cain does something extremely important in the ancient narrative. He does not simply wander the earth in isolation. He builds, he organizes, he constructs the first city. Autonomy scales into civilization. The descendants of Cain develop remarkable technologies. They pioneer making instruments. They build various things. They develop urban infrastructure and even complex social systems. Technological sophistication explodes, but moral alignment collapses. A later descendant named Lamech openly boasts about balance and revenge. Power becomes a virtue. Domination becomes cultural identity. And here the pattern reveals something deeply counterintuitive. Technological complexity does not equal moral alignment. A civilization can advance dramatically in engineering, infrastructure, and innovation while simultaneously drifting further away from truth. Technical brilliance and moral wisdom are not the same thing. Human history repeatedly demonstrates that a society can master extraordinary tools while losing the wisdom required to use them responsibly. The city of Cain becomes the first proof that technological sophistication alone cannot guarantee human flourishing. But the pattern does not stop there. Autonomous systems have an inherent tendency towards expansion, which brings us to the next step. Babel. In the ancient narrative, humanity unites in a single technological project, building a tower reaching into the heavens. Their declared goal is revealing. Let us make a name for ourselves. This is autonomy on a civilizational scale. Technology is no longer used to explore reality, it is used to replace it. And something fascinating happens when we compare the story to the modern technological world. At Babel, languages are confused and the unified systems fragments. But in the 21st century, humanity has begun attempting something very similar again. Through digital networks, global platforms, and algorithmic communication systems, we have effectively constructed a modern Babel. The goal was universal connection, but the result has been something quite different. Fragmented epistemologies. Different groups now operate with entirely different frameworks for determining what is true. People can observe the same data, the same events, the same information, and arrive at completely incompatible realities. Not because they are incapable of understanding facts, but because their information environments have been engineered to reinforce existing beliefs. Modern algorithms optimize engagement, not truth. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Confirmation spreads faster than correction. And as a result, humanity now inhabits thousands of digital towers. We may speak the same language, but we no longer share the same reality. This stage of the pattern produces three major risks. First, the manipulation of perception. Second, the engineering of echo chambers. And third, the concentration of technological power. And when these three forces combine, the final stage of the pattern emerges: Babylon. Babylon represents the fully matured autonomous system. It is not merely a city. It is a civilizational architecture organized around power, economic dominance, and narrative control. At this stage, the system no longer adapts to reality. It attempts to force reality to conform to the system. Three priorities dominate: power over truth, reputation over integrity, control over justice. From the outside, such systems appear unstoppable. But internally they are unstable. Because reality cannot be permanently rewritten by narrative. Eventually, the gap between truth and the system's claims become too large, and collapse becomes inevitable. Yet the ancient text also describes another thread running quietly through history: a counter trajectory, a path defined not by autonomy, but by what I call the stability of love, life, and light. Throughout every era, there have been individuals who refuse to surrender their conscience to systems of deception. People who remain receptive to reality, who maintain integrity even when deception becomes profitable, who demonstrate courage when truth becomes dangerous. These individuals form the unseen structural reinforcement of human civilization. They are the ones who preserve coherence while autonomous systems collapse around them. The ancient writers described this contrast as the tale of two cities. Babylon, the civilization built on pride and autonomy, and the New Jerusalem, the community aligned with truth. That choice is not merely historical. It is happening constantly in every institution, every organization, every technological ecosystem, and ultimately in every human heart. The question confronting our technological age is the same question humanity has faced from the beginning. Will we build systems rooted in autonomy and self-exaltation, or systems grounded in humility and alignment with reality? Because the pattern suggests something profound. Civilizations do not collapse primarily because they become weak. They collapse because they lose their relationship to truth. So the real challenge of the 21st century may not be technological innovation. It may be moral clarity, keeping our ears open to corrective feedback, remaining anchored to reality, and refusing to trade conscience for convenience. Because once you begin to recognize the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere.